It is another day, and there is another RTX Super Refresh card, this time in the form of the 4080 Super 16GB. And this is replacing the RTX 4080, but it's coming in $200 US cheaper on the MSRP price. And we're going to talk about that pricing a little bit later, but in terms of specs, you get roughly 5% more CUDA cores. However, there are some specs that do remain identical, and two of those being the ROPS as well as the level 2 cache. Now, there's also slightly faster speeds on the VRAM as well as the boost clock, but I found in games, and this is where we're going to pull up the 1440p as well as 4K benchmarks, I found it didn't really make a difference between the vanilla 4080. I was actually left in some of these titles scratching my head because I was hoping for maybe a 5 to 6% uplift when we pull up, for instance, Alan Wake 2 at 1440p and 4K. We can see the results are very neck and neck between the original 4080 and then going on to Fortnite here. I think we saw one of the biggest gains, but in terms of percentages, it's not looking that huge either at 1440p or 4K. And then onto Apex Legends at 1440p, it hits roughly that 300 FPS cap. Onto 4K, very minimal difference between the 4080 vanilla. And then onto Cyberpunk 2077, very similar showing. And then going on to Returnal at 1440p and 4K showed again not much of a big uptake here in performance. And then onto Starfield, it was a similar story. So what I'm seeing with these raw gaming benchmarks is something that is pretty much a 4080, but it's now got a 200 USD price drop. Now, this is a good thing if you're in the US, where I see these cards constantly coming around those MSRP prices. But if we're in Australia, and we'll actually talk about the pricing here because I think this is the biggest thing with the 4080 Super. So people in the US, you've got a better deal essentially, just like the 4070 Ti Super and of course the 4070 Super that was coming in $599, the 4070 Ti Super at $799. Those prices are hitting the shelves in the US. But when we look at the rest of the world, which if I look at my YouTube audience stats, is the majority of you guys, I think about 20-something% of you guys are from the US. Outside of the US, this is where the prices do get very mushy, where if we look at Australia, for example, where I'm living at the moment, we've got here a price tag on a 4080 going on clear out for $1499. Now, the 4080 Super is going to come in at around 1,900 Australian dollars. That's for a entry-level model. And at this price, you're paying an extra 400 Aussie dollars for almost the same thing. And so that is where the pricing is going to come in here. The US pricing definitely is going to make it so it's a better deal for you people who want to get a high-end GPU and get a better price than the previous 4080. And it actually makes the 4080 Super much more attractive at those US MSRP prices. However, for the rest of the world, it's simply a matter of supply and demand. And at the moment, if you're looking around this price point, whether it's a 4070 Ti Super in Australia or a 4080 or a 4080 Super, I think the answer there is obvious, just to go out and get an RTX 4080 vanilla and save some money, knowing that you're getting the best deal in this realm of high-end GPUs. Now, of course, the 4090, we put that in the charts, but at the moment, this card is almost becoming unobtainable, especially at reasonable prices, where in Australia, it'll set you back over 3,000 Australian dollars. In the US, I see them going for over 2,000 USD. So the value is just simply not there at the current street prices. Now, of course, we will go over some other benchmarks here, namely the power consumption, where the 4080 Super basically comes in with very similar power consumption to the 4080. That's no surprise, and it does undervolt quite well. And so if we're looking at the best power efficiency on the high end, I would say this card does a lot better actually than compared to the 4070 Ti Super even, where it's just maximizing that 256-bit bus with that higher amount of level 2 cache versus say the 4070 Ti Super. And I'm finding it's better overall in terms of power efficiency. So the 4080 and the 4080 Super are definitely, in my opinion, better picks, especially if you're not in the US, than the 4070 Ti Super. Now, in terms of the 7900 XTX and the 7900 XT, this generation of AMD cards is less power efficient than the NVIDIA cards. There's no way to sugarcoat that. There's no way to say it any other way, but the NVIDIA cards are more efficient. They do a better job in giving you better FPS per watt. And of course, this comes down to where you live and how much you are paying for power. I can't tell you if that's going to be a better deal for the raw rasterization numbers out of the XT and the XTX versus, say, the NVIDIA cards. So it all depends on where you live and what prices you can get. But let's get over some ray tracing numbers here, where the NVIDIA card, if we're looking at Returnal, I found this benchmark is a sort of lightweight in terms of ray tracing. The NVIDIA cards do better than the AMD cards, but the 4080 Super isn't doing that much better at all, just like the raw rasterization numbers, than the 4080 that's replacing. And then if we go over to Alan Wake 2, it's yet again a very similar story. So the performance uptick on this card, I was expecting a bit more when it came to both raw numbers and ray tracing numbers. Of course, you've got the option for DLSS 3 thrown in there if you want to get the extra FPS on games that aren't competitive, especially given there's a slight introduction of input latency on top of that. But for role-playing games, DLSS 3 as well as DLSS 2, they do make a big difference if you want to get the most out of your GPU. Now, moving on to the Founders card itself, we have here in today's review the 4080 Super FE. So this is NVIDIA's own make and design on this card with two fans, one front and back, both magnetic levitating fans. Honestly, out of all the high-end cards I've tested here, these cards are designed with near perfection, where the temperatures versus the noise are simply phenomenal. And remember, I am testing here in a 26°C ambient environment, and these cards are just pulling out some terrific numbers. So if you do manage to get a Founders card, it's going to be whisper quiet as well as being very cool. Now, if you want to undervolt on top of that, you'll get even better temperatures, which I do highly recommend on any desktop GPU because you'll just get much better power efficiency. And of course, you'll have a card that's now running at even lower temps, and the temperatures in a 26 ambient environment, I think it's a no-brainer to go undervolt. Though in terms of the card itself, it is an absolute beast of a card. It is a triple slot design. You will need a lot of space in your case to fit this, and it does come included with a 3 8-pin to 12-volt PCIe Gen 5 adapter. So if you don't have one of those natively on your power supply, you can get away with using 3 8-pins, which is what we used for the benchmarking here today, and we're pretty much pegged at 99 to 100% GPU utilization in all the benchmarks we did. So in other words, it didn't make a difference if we used a native or the 3 8-pin adapter. That the Founders Edition 4080 Super now has, just like the 4070 Super, an all-black design, and then the only part you'll find a different color is really on the rear of the card with the 3 DisplayPort 1.4s and HDMI 2.1 connection, which is standard on pretty much all RTX 4000 series cards. And lastly, I will give kudos to NVIDIA with this design. It is one of the best looking Founders Edition cards I've seen yet. The simple black design coupled in with the temps and noise does make it a winner. But now we're going to go over to conclusion, where the actual 4080 Super itself isn't that much of a winner. I think the price drop, as we said earlier with the pricing, the $999 MSRP in the US, you guys in the US are going to have a decent option now with better value than the 4080 was. So if you can get that 1000 USD MSRP, you're going to have a good high-end gaming card. But for the rest of the world, for instance Australia, 1900 Australian dollars plus, when the 4080 is going out on sale for 1500 Aussie dollars now, even at $1600, which is what it was before in the previous 4070 Ti Super review, it's a better deal in all metrics except the 2 to 3% uplift I was seeing in performance in these benchmarks. So ultimately now, coming out of these three supercard releases, I'm going to say there is one clear winner, and that is the RTX 4070 Super. I thought the performance uplift for roughly the same price as the 4070 did make it so that it was a pretty big deal on the Super refresh cards, because me personally, I'm not too big into VRAM requirements as I am opposed to just using the card and getting the FPS on the screen to be as high as possible and of course as smooth as possible. And what I found with the 4070 Super was that gave a massive uptick over the 4070, but then when I looked at the 4070 Ti Super, that was a bit better than the 4070 Ti, and now looking at the 4080 Super, that's even less of a performance uptick than the 4070 Ti Super was over the 4070 Ti. And so this card here, the 200 USD price drop official, is the best part about it. It's not so much you're getting a massive performance increase. I was hoping for roughly a 5 to 6% performance uptick, given that the CUDA cores are roughly 5% more and you've got higher memory clocks as well as higher boost clocks there, but that just didn't eventuate in the real world when it came to the gaming benchmark. So ultimately, wrapping things up with this card, I think it's going to be just like the 4070 Ti Super recommendation. It's going to be a factor of where you live and what prices you can get these cards for. Ultimately, me personally, I always look what's on the market. It doesn't matter if it's a budget, used, low-end banger GPU used, or if it's a mid-range card or a high-end card new. I'm always looking for the best deal. And so in this case, on the high end, I'm really only looking at the 4080 over the 4070 Ti Super, 4080 Super now, and also the 4090. So just got to look out where you are, what you're in the market for. The final thing to touch on here, just like the 4080 Super cards are massive. So if you've got mini ITX dreams, like me personally, I love mini ITX. This card, I think there's going to be a hard time finding some of those smaller cards, which when you look at it, especially when you undervolt the card, it can perform very well. It would fit into a lot of mini ITX rigs in terms of its power consumption. So I personally am hoping to see a few smaller models of this card be released in time, because at the moment I'm using a 4070 Ti 2-slot from Gigabyte, and that does the job perfectly in a mini ITX rig. But that being said, I've got no big desire to upgrade my personal GPU, as it does everything. And so the 4070 Ti, just like the 4080 Super now, does have those 2 encoders. And I do like to stress this: if you're doing anything outside of just gaming, if you're streaming or you're video editing, that extra encoder can very much come in handy. And also as well, if you're, say, doing professional work on AI, then the 16GB 256-bit bus 4080 Super can do very well, but I'd say maybe the 4070 Ti Super would then be a better deal in that aspect. Anyway, guys, with all that aside, hope you enjoyed today's review. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button, and also let us know in the comments section below what you think of the 4080 Super, and what about your local area? Are you experiencing what I'm experiencing personally, and that is just the 4080 on the clear out sales, the best deal? Do let us know your thoughts and opinions. Love reading it as always, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.